Okay, so this is the second problem in the mock. So just pause the video and read the problem statement. So we have these float numbers, okay, and they are said to have a long tail if the number of digits after the decimal is more than the number of digits before the decimal. So for example, 12.3214 is said to have a long tail because there are 4 digits after the decimal, whereas there are only 2 before the decimal point. So you have to write a function that accepts a list of numbers as argument and should return the number of or count of long tail numbers, okay, in the list. So how do we go about this? Let's get started. Let's make it bigger. Okay, so if you know what you want to do, you can even get rid of the doc string. So in this case, the description of the function is quite clear to me, and I also know what the parameters are. It's a list which is passed as input, and you have to return an integer as the output, right? So you have to return an integer, so I can get rid of the doc string because in this case I know exactly what the input output is expected of me, right? So I have a clear idea of that. How do we go about doing this? Okay, so let's first take an example. I'm looking at this number 12.3456. Okay, now there will be a list of such numbers. Okay, so first I need to know if one of them, so is each one of them a long tail number or not. So that is what I need to determine. So just like the previous problem where we were looking at twin primes and where we had to find out if given number is prime or not, here it will be useful if we can check if a particular number has a long tail or not. Okay, I'll pass some number n, or let me call it x. X is useful, is a better name in my opinion because we are dealing with a float value. So n maybe gives the sense of an integer. So x is here a float value, and you have to return true if x is having a long tail, otherwise return false. So now let's consider the same example. So what do we do if we have a number like 12.3456? Okay, so whenever we have to deal with the individual digits of a number, it's always convenient to convert the number, whether it's an integer or a float value, into a string. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll convert x into a string and I'll store it in this variable called num. So num for an input like 12.3456, num will actually store 12, the string containing 12.3456, right? So if this is x, if x is equal to this, then num will be this. So what can I do now? I need the part of this number. I need to separate this number into two parts. Everything that comes before the decimal should go into the first part. Everything that comes after the decimal point should go into the second part. Okay. So if you think about it, you actually know a function that splits a string into multiple parts. What is that function? Or rather method. Okay, I should not, it's also a function, but it's better to call it a string method. Okay, I know a string method, or you all should be knowing a string method by now, which can split a string into different parts based on some delimiter. Here the delimiter is dot. Okay, if you give a dot as the string along which you have to split, then it will return two parts. Okay, so 12.34567, again I'll do this as comments here. If you split this, if you split this string using the split method, and if you pass the delimiter as full stop, it will give you a list. Okay, always remember the split method returns a list of strings. So the first, there'll be just two elements in this string, in this list. Okay, there'll be just two strings in this list. What will they be? Everything that comes before this dot and everything that comes after this dot. Okay, so what can I do now? I can now unpack this into two variables. I can call them first and second. Okay, so I'm now going to convert all of this into code, proper code. So first num is the string that I have with me. So I'm going to split this based on dot. That will give me a list. Okay, that will give me a list. Let's say I call it L. So first is going to be L of 0. Second, the second part of the string num after the full stop is going to be L of 1, or the period. Okay, we can either call it full stop or period. Now this is what we have. when is a number having said to have a long tail? If the second part, if the length of the second part is greater than the length of the first part, then it is, you can return true. You can return true. If not, return false. But recall that when you have to do this true false business, you actually don't need an if else block most of the time. So you can just return length of second greater than length of first. So whenever the second is longer than the first, it will evaluate to true. If not, it will evaluate to false. And whatever is that boolean value, you return that. Okay, so what we have done is to find out if a given number, if one number has a long tail or not. Now it's very simple. You have to iterate through the elements in L for x in L, each float value in L. Check if it has a long tail. Check if x has a long tail. If it has a long tail, you can increment count. Okay, count clearly should be initialized before you enter the function. So let us set it to 0. Now this will count the number of integers with a long tail, and you can return count. Okay, so let's first go ahead and run this and see what we get. So submit button will itself take care of both the test run and the actual submit, right? So 5 out of 5 private tests have passed, and you will just notice that the public tests have also passed here. Okay, so you actually don't need to individually keep running the test run always. Directly go ahead and submit it. I will save time. So let's now go back to the solution. I'll remove the comments now that you've understood hopefully what is happening. So let's simplify this is long tail. I'll delete the whole thing and do it again. So what are we doing? We are first converting the float value into a string using the str of x function. Okay, or sometimes it's called the str string constructor, but that's not relevant right now. So you're converting this into a string. You're storing the result in num. Recall that num is a string now. What do you have to do? You have to split the string using the split method, and the delimiter that you pass is full stop or period or decimal point, whatever you wish to call it. This will return a list having two elements. Okay, so this will return a list having two elements. Store the first one in first, the second one in second. The first string in first, the second element of the list in second. So I have written this slightly differently now. Earlier I had a explicit variable called L that which was storing the output of num dot split. Okay, now what I am doing is unpacking the entries in the list L into the variables first and second. So this is list unpacking that I am doing here. Okay, so the first entry of the list will go into first, second entry of the list will go into second. So once that is done, you just need to return length of second greater than length of first. Okay, so if it is a long tail, then length of second should be greater than length of first, right? Or rather, if length of second is greater than length of first, it is a long tail, it will return true. If not, it will return false. Okay, so now let's go back and run this again. Okay, so that is the end of the solution to the second problem in the mock.